Michelle Marie McGrath. Hi, and welcome to another great episode of Unclassified Woman. Today is particularly special in that I'm talking to Jody Day, who was actually the first lady I interviewed on the podcast a few years ago. So I'm actually talking to Jody about what's been happening in the meantime with her work, her writing, and her network that she created, Gateway Women. So Jody is the founder of Gateway Women, the global friendship and support network for childless women, and the author of Living the Life Unexpected, 12 Weeks to Your Plan B for a Meaningful and Fulfilling Future Without Children. A thought leader on female involuntary childlessness, she's a founding and former board member at AWOC, Aging Without Children. A former Cambridge Judge, business fellow in social innovation, a TEDx speaker, and a trainee psychotherapist. So, in a nutshell, she's a very busy lady. Jody takes great pleasure in helping childless women get their groove back and find their tribe via the Gateway Women workshops, online communities, and social meetups that happen all around the globe. So I do hope you enjoy this conversation. I loved hearing about what Jody's up to and her current and future writing projects. And she's just such a mine of information about anything related to childlessness. So it's always a pleasure to talk to her. Enjoy. So welcome back, Jody. Great to have you here today. And it's going to be a very special episode because, of course, you were the first person I interviewed on Unclassified Woman.
I know, it's incredible. I was listening back to the interview this morning and it was 4 years ago. And it's wonderful to be speaking with you again.
Yeah, and so I'm sure you've got so much to share with us because I know that you've had an extremely busy time since then, which is an understatement, it seems.
Yes.
So, do you want to give us a little bit of an update and fill us in on where you've been at, what you've been doing, and how things have progressed?
Yes, absolutely. So Gateway Women, incredibly, was 7 years old in April 2018. So sort of 7 years since I wrote the first blog.
Gosh.
So, 7 years ago last month. And it's been an extraordinary roller coaster trip from, writing a blog that I just didn't think, if one person reads this and gets it, that would be fantastic. And then getting my first piece of PR the very next day, being interviewed for The Guardian, and really just discovering all these other women all around the world who were, leaving comments on the blog saying, how can you know the exact words in my head? I thought I was the only person thinking these things. I thought I was the only person having this experience. And I suppose basically finding my tribe, finding out that I was part, in the UK of, 1 in 5 women, reaching midlife without having had children, and 1 in 4 for my age, 1 in 5 for those who are slightly younger than me. I'm going to be 54 this summer. And it's, it's an extraordinary thing because 7 years ago when I started writing and then speaking about childlessness, I was kind of a bit of a lone voice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has changed, and I think it is partly to do with Gateway Women, is that it is becoming a topic that is more often in the press, more often talked about. It's not as hidden as it was. It's still as painful as it was, but it's not as hidden as it was. And that's incredible. And I think there's been a lucky accident in that, in being British, in doing that, because, London has such a kind of an influence, and UK has such an influence on the media around the world. So my little blog, and then my articles, and then my talks and things like that, when they happened in England, that got amplified and had quite a big impact because it's, the UK is a small country. Whereas if I'd had started that blog in the US, for example, it takes a lot to make a cultural impact in America because it's so big.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my work, and the work of Gateway Women, like, appears huge because it's been amplified because of where it started, and I think because it's very zeitgeisty, it was very much needed at that time, and just luck in that the way that I did it, the way that I sort of, I mean, when people talk about branding, I'm kind of doing inverted commas with my hands. So I didn't brand Gateway Women. I just did it like me.
Yeah.
And one of the things I never wanted it to look like or feel like was a kind of self-helpy, bloggy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it's, got quite a funky look, and, the language can be quite strong, and I don't know, it's me. But that has created quite a modern brand that I think a lot of women have been able to identify with, because, I use my own name, I use my own photo, I didn't hide. And they just thought, well, maybe if she can be sort of out and proud about her unchosen childlessness, maybe I can too. It's resonated in a way with a lot of women, I think, that perhaps a more medical angle blog, or maybe a more therapeutic angle blog, might not have done. I think that's been part of its success.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's just such a combination of taboos, the whole topic. One, talking about grief, which as a culture, let's face it, we just don't do that well at all. In fact, often it's just
that's an understatement.
Yeah, completely. So, especially when you're dealing with childlessness and topics like infertility and all those very painful experiences that totally go against, the sort of the public image of what it means to be a woman, which is often all about motherhood. We have this glorification of motherhood. And so, of course, it can be very painful. And it's often one of those things that isn't talked about openly, like you say, until recent years, where there are so many more of these discussions, and then other people saying, yeah, me too, that's how I feel. And I think you've really become a voice for those women who haven't felt able to express themselves. And of course, up until now. And so it's interesting, like you say, I've really noticed this big outpouring in the last couple of years where people are much more open now about it.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. I think also the next generation coming up behind us, the millennials. I mean, I've been saying for some time that I felt that there was going to be a much higher rate of both chosen and unchosen childlessness within the millennial generation because of the, a variety of factors, including, the economic instability, the environmental instability, lots of things that were going to make it, a different environment for them. And yet also they are a generation that's grown up. Social media has always been a part of their life. Being open, they have a different idea of privacy.
Well, they don't have any.
And they do seem to be a much more emotionally literate generation.
Yeah.
And I also, they would have been my children. That generation is the generation that my kids would have been, where they would have been in their 20s now. So I think I have nephews and nieces in that generation, and I feel, very tenderly towards them. And I think that they are influencing us, their older generation, in their willingness to be open and vulnerable. That is so different from when you think of our parents' generation.
Yes.
We are so much more open than them. But goodness, they were taught, you just suck it up and don't say anything and, pull yourself together, and then the generation coming after us are then another layer of gentleness, I think, is coming out.
Yeah, so true. I mean, even just topics like talking about periods, for example. Again, it's just something I know that my mum said to me, that when she was a teen, again, it was never discussed. These things just were not talked about. Pregnancy, contraception, all of these topics, again, never discussed.
The shame of having a body.
Absolutely. So that is changing very much, I feel, isn't it? Absolutely. And it needs to.
I tell you one area that we still need to see some massive shifts in. I mean, so much around, your work is so much around the female body but around menopause,
Yes, yes.
We still need a massive shift in this area.
I think that is, yeah, absolutely right. And funny that you mentioned that actually, Jody, because I myself went to a workshop all about perimenopause and menopause last year. It was just a one-day thing called Autumn Harvest Queen. And it was with a brilliant Australian lady actually called Jane Hardwick Collins, who focuses very much on that. And I thought, I just want to know more about this because I feel as though I don't really know a lot about it. And it's, again, one of those topics that's not really discussed. Well, the whole day was a revelation to me. Like, of course, there are all the hormonal changes, but there's so many good things about those hormonal changes that, again, is also not talked about, and about the fact that it can actually be such an empowering time in a woman's life. And, you know, that there's so many different factors and how you can prepare very much for it health-wise. And, you know, there was just so much great stuff that was shared that I thought, wow, you just don't hear about this. It's always in a very negative slant, when actually there's a lot of really good stuff in there that's actually great to know.
Yeah, there's. I mean, I always share what I know, and that seems to be, you know, kind of how Gateway Women and how I operate, which is that, you know, women say, you know, you have so much wisdom or whatever to me, and I'll say, no. It just looks like that from where you're standing, because what I've been through and what I've learned as I've been through it, I share. Yeah. But actually what I'm dealing with now and what I'm dealing with in the future, I'm going into it blind, just like we all do. Yeah. And so then hopefully I'll learn from that, and then I'll share that. So I have shared a huge amount about my own experience of menopause, and also, you know, being in a privileged position of hearing so many other women's stories through my work, you know, through the workshops, through the online community, through my online courses. You know, I have become like a vault of so much of kind of lived information, you know, rather, as you have, having spoken to so many women through this, you know, doing this podcast for such a long time, you realize I've learned so much from these women.
And you hear so many of the same threads all the time, don't you?
Yeah. And it's like, how can I find a way to offer that back? Because I'm in such a privileged position, being the one that hears all this.
Of course. And it's interesting, you know, another topic that's quite taboo that I've heard a lot about recently. And again, I think this is something that really needs to be talked about much more. And of course, with everything that's happening in Ireland at the moment as well, it's so relevant about abortion. I've heard of so many stories recently, and some of them that have been shared on the interviews that are, you know, being released very soon, where again it's something that's so common, where women are in a situation where they feel that they have to have an abortion, that's the right thing to do at the time, and then later on, of course, they may be trying for a child and it doesn't happen, and then they can feel like they're being punished. But the shame and the guilt and the grief about it, but again, it's just not something that we talk about openly. There's still a lot of secrecy about it, and women
it's part of my story too. And you know, we did touch on it in our first interview, because I always mention it. Yeah. And one of the reasons I always mention it is because it's taboo. It's because so I know that the chances are there will be a woman listening and who will feel less alone.
Definitely.
When she hears, okay, because you know, one in three women is going to have an abortion in their life.
I feel at least, actually, I know so many women that have had them that have never told anybody. It's really common.
So the chances are that, you know, most of those women, because of the statistics, are going to go on to be mothers. Yeah. And some of them are going to, you know, go on to not be mothers, either by choice or not. I've given an interview actually with Phoebe Lynch, who's a British journalist. And I've given an interview with her about this for Stella magazine. Yes. Which will be coming out soon. And you know, she said no one's gone on record talking about childlessness after abortion before, like in a kind of major newspaper. It's like the taboo within the taboo.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's incredible. I mean, it's just, I don't think anyone should feel bad about that at all, because that is just such a big experience. And then people often just go back to work the next day, and then they have to kind of pretend that nothing's happened. And they're just, you know, when they've gone through this huge experience that must just be filled with so many mixed emotions.
It was really scary. You know, I was only 20. It was really scary. And my abortion was, given to me by the NHS. So part of the kind of the state-sponsored care system. I was in a kind of a ward with women who were heavily pregnant, just sort of mixed in, and just had this sense of being treated very roughly, treated very aggressively and dismissively by the staff. It was a really horrible experience. Yeah. I mean, my mum, was with me, she was there. She kind of went through it with me, which was amazing. But, I have almost like when I look back at that now, it's a long time ago now. I just had this feeling that I was treated like dirty, damaged goods. It was horrible, horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things whereby it really needs to be addressed differently, doesn't it? It's just, and then when you think, well, there's all this campaigning going on at the moment in Ireland about hopefully that will change. Let's, fingers crossed.
Well, we're very close to the vote, and it will be. I mean, I so hope that Irish women get the chance to, to make their own decisions for their own bodies.
Yeah, which it seems kind of ludicrous, doesn't it, in this day and age? But
Ireland is becoming quite a progressive country. It's a lot less, it's a lot less Catholic than it used to be. And it has a gay prime minister. They've legalized same-sex marriage. It's like this feels like one of the last pieces of kind of very old Catholic legislation that's holding not just the women of the country back, but the men of the country back too. It's antediluvian.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, so hopefully that will all be a very different situation very soon.
I really hope so.
Yeah. And so, Jody, I was just then thinking about how much has changed for you as well. Like, I know that with your book that went out, and then of course I know that you edited it, didn't you? You updated it. Mm-hmm. And so what sort of opportunities, and I'm sure that's sent you on a whole different path. And I know, like, all your studies as well, that you probably never would have foreseen that like 7 years ago.
No, well, my studies are still ongoing because I have one more placement to find. Which is a sort of a psychiatric placement. And then once I've completed that, then I can hand in all my final papers and I can graduate finally, eventually next spring. So I've sort of finished the training part of becoming a psychotherapist. I've just got almost like a bit of admin left to do.
Yes.
And then the second edition of my book came out in February 2016. It's a much bigger book than the original self-published one. It contains interviews with 24 childless women, including 2 childless men. So 22 women, 2 men from all over the world. And that, really changes, the sense that the first book felt like my story.
Yes. Yeah.
And the new book that, feels like our stories. And that feels really important. And I also had an opportunity to update, because I've learned so much.
Yeah, of course.
I finished that first book on the 31st of December 2012, because I was determined I was going to finish it that year, 11:30 at night. And, so I've learned so much since then from the many, almost 1,000 women that I've worked with sort of one-to-one on this topic. And then, Gateway Women has what's called a social reach.
Yes.
2 million.
Gosh. So it just shows the demand that's there.
Yes.
And the need.
And growing. It's, not every childless woman, the approach of Gateway Women is going to be right for them. Not every childless woman is sad about her situation. I mean, some have chosen it, so they have a different experience altogether. But even some of those who haven't chosen it have found their own way to make peace with that.
Yeah.
So not everyone's looking for support. Not everyone's looking for their tribe. Each childless woman is an individual because each woman is an individual.
Absolutely. And so what do you feel is going to be, because obviously, like you said, there's just been so many changes. It's being talked about much more, just the amount of people that you've connected with.
Yeah.
What do you kind of feel is going to be the next stage of the social changes that are taking place in that, now that it is being much more openly discussed and widespread? I mean, I wanted to ask you your thoughts about legacy.
Legacy is always an interesting topic for childless women, because I think when we're grieving, it's one that it assumes a very large sort of significance in our psyche. And something I've noticed is that as you come out the other end of your grieving, it may not feel quite so important as it did. I mean, I think for me, when I was writing the second edition of my book, I was staying in a little sort of lodge in the mountains in France, like writing like a demon every day for 5 weeks, because I just had that space to get the second edition done. And my oldest friend from school came to stay with me for a few days, and I was working on the bit of the book that talks about legacy. And she's really tiny. She's 5 foot. I was almost 5'10". I think I've shrunk a bit. But we've always been, we've known each other since we were adolescents. I've always been this really tall one, and she's been the short one. So we were kind of together. We were walking in the mountains, and she kind of looked up at me, as she does, and she said, "Jodes," because that's the name that my family and friends know me as. "Jodes, I don't think you realise how different my life would have been had I never known you." And I just kind of looked at you, because I was talking to her about legacy, and it just really sparked off this awareness in me that legacy doesn't have to be this thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, a painting, a book, a bench with your name on this. Oh, so-and-so did this.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a physical thing.
Yeah, it can be a legacy of a lifetime of interactions, of meaningful interactions. And the impact that us being us, alive on this earth, has had on others. And I think that is a beautiful legacy. And I remember one day I went to an art gallery in London, the Tate Modern, and I went to have some lunch in the cafe there. And, it was one of those sort of buffet things, and I asked for something hot. So the woman who was serving behind the counter had to put it on the plate and hand it through to me. And as she handed it through to me and put it on my tray, she kind of said, "There you are, thank you, sort of have a nice day." And I looked up at her and I just went, "How's your day going?" And she just looked at me, and just her eyes filled with tears. And she said, "You are the first person today who has seen me."
Wow.
And I think of moments like that. If you imagine a lifetime of moments of kindness, of moments of empathy, where we connect in a real way with another human being, I think that can be a legacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't have to be a child, doesn't have to be a family. And yes, I've got a book, and yes, I created Gateway Women, but I don't think it's necessary to do a thing.
Yeah, because in a way that's almost then can be felt as like another pressure. Do I then have to create something else to prove that I had any right to be here, that there was any meaning to my life?
And that's the key thing. I had a right to be here? And that's sometimes where the whole Plan B thing can get a bit confusing, because sometimes when we talk about Plan B, it has to be like a thing.
Yes.
And it's just, and I say to people, no, Plan B is just a shorthand for creating a life of meaning.
Yeah, which can look like whatever. It can look completely different, and it will look completely different for every person, that won't it?
And it can also look completely the same as your life already looks.
Yes.
It's just that you are completely different on the inside. If you are at peace with your life, at peace with your sense of being a childless woman, then that is your Plan B. It's just that the work has been on the inside rather than the outside. But often there's this idea that it has to be on the outside. And it can often lead to, in the early stages, what I call the Mother Teresa complex, which is that we have this fantasy that we have to do something enormous. And sort of self-sacrificing with our lives to earn our status as women.
Yeah.
And I think when I realized I was in danger of doing that, because I had this fantasy that I was going to give away all my possessions and move to Laos, which is Asian country just next to Cambodia. this amazing Buddhist country that I went to and I just fell in love with when I was traveling. And I was going to go and live in this orphanage on the Mekong Delta. And I was going to spend my whole life in this orphanage. And then when I died, I was going to be floated down the river, on a sort of burning thing covered in flowers. And then there was this little tiny picture of me kind of on the South Sea China News of this kind of eccentric old Englishwoman with 2 long grey plaits. I was going to be very thin in the picture. The hair was very important, about this extraordinary woman, eccentric Englishwoman. And then over time, I kind of started to reflect on this, and I thought, what is this fantasy about? And it's about wanting to make my pain so visible by doing something so extraordinary that people would realize, what was happening inside me. Yeah. It was also about wanting to show that I had a mother's heart.
Yes.
And that because I felt that part of me was not witnessed, not validated, and that without becoming a mother, I could never claim it. I also thought, gosh, if that is the extremity I think I need to go to in order to have the same status as a mother, as if I had been a mother, how overvalued has motherhood become?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I reflected on it as well, and I realized also it was a terribly narcissistic fantasy because I wasn't thinking about the children at all. It's all about me.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? But yeah, interesting that you felt that sort of pressure to do something like that, so dramatic. I think that's very revealing, isn't it?
Very visible. It was about, I wanted it visible.
Yeah.
It was like to my interior world, because no one would let me talk about it. And I felt that I had no value as a woman. I was in the depths of my grief. I mean, there were days when I just thought really the oxygen I was breathing would be better used by someone else. I really didn't see the point of me as a living being anymore. And I came although I didn't have suicidal fantasies. I mean, there were moments, I'd be driving my car on the motorway in the rain, in the dark, big lorries. I just thought, what if I just twitched the wheel of my car? These little moments of intense fantasy. And I did think if I did, go to sleep and didn't wake up, that would have been fine with me. And I think people just who haven't had intense grief and the alienation that comes, the social isolation and alienation that also comes with childlessness, it's hard to imagine how low it can take us.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Those sort of times in your life that now that you've obviously moved out of that space to sort of reflect upon and see like the progression and the growth that you've had since that time and how you've been able to really transform those experiences into compassion for other people going through that.
Yeah. And compassion increasingly for all disenfranchised groups.
Yes.
I think finding myself in midlife as part of the out group and being stigmatized and judged and alienated and left out because of something which had not been my choosing. It was an accident of fate that I ended up childless. It's like it wasn't my choice. Really opened my eyes to what it's like to be a part of all disenfranchised groups. And I thought I'd been empathetic before, but this experience has really changed me and opened my eyes to the experience of being, a person of color, what it might be like to be a refugee, what it might be like to be, disabled in some way. Just that sense of you've been dealt something that you didn't choose, and you are judged for it.
Yes.
And your opportunities and experience is limited by it. And that people have an opinion about you because of it, without knowing you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we do live in a very strongly pro-natalist society. I mean, there's just no getting away from it.
Well, I mean, I gave a talk recently at Fertility Fest in London. They did this series of talks, which is called Fertility Fight Club. So it's like a 10-minute talk where you have to kind of, and you're encouraged they asked us to be sort of, quite provocative. So I thought, okay, this is something I'm talking about more and more in my work. And I think, sort of referring back to an earlier question, I think this is something that will be sort of a big part of the future of my work and the future of Gateway Women is really starting to tackle systemic pronatalism.
Yeah.
And in my talk, I called it Calling Time on Pronatalist Privilege. And if you go to the fertilityfest.com website and click on Fertility Fight Clubs, you can actually see this talk. And I am drawing parallels between how systemic racism operates and how systemic pronatalism operates. And if any of your listeners are unfamiliar with the term pronatalism, it is the ideology that says that it is that the only way to be a fully functioning adult member of society is to be a parent, and that rights of parents trump the rights of people without children. So that you are basically a more important person because you've had children. And this is an ideological view that is kind of in the water. So we accept it without question. Interestingly, when you are the privilege holder, so as a white woman, I have the privilege of being white.
Yeah.
And then if you have children, you have the privilege of being a parent. So that's what I call, parental pronatalist privilege. When you are the holder of that privilege, it takes a lot of work to see what it's like not to hold that privilege. And a line that comes up in anti-racism work is when you're used to when you're used to privilege, inequality feels like unfairness.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how when I do bring up the subject with parents, and it's happened also with AWOC, with Aging Without Children, when we try to talk to parents about the experience of aging without children, or talk to parents about the difficulties with being childless, what we get back is, number one, whataboutism, i.e., what about us? It's really hard being us too, but also this sense of dismissing that we actually have any legitimate concern at all.
Yes, yeah.
And it's and often quite a lot of passive aggressive hostility that it makes speaking up about these things hard.
Yeah.
And that's not a coincidence, because that's how the status quo gets maintained. And if you are a woman of color and you speak up about these things, then you're the angry black woman.
Yeah.
If you are a childless woman and you speak up at these things, you're bitter. There are these kind of shaming put downs
Yes.
to basically make you shut up.
Yeah, and just get over it and stop whinging.
And it takes a lot to keep pushing back against that, because we didn't choose our childlessness, we don't choose our ethnicity, but if we are being if our experience is being changed by this, and if opportunities are being closed off to us because of this, at a certain point you have to rise up. And I really take so much heart from the LGBTQI community and how they have transformed the way we think and talk about sexuality and gender in my lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, in the 1970s, I was born in the 60s, but in the 1970s, when I was kind of watching TV growing up, just being gay in a TV sitcom marked you out as the figure of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
They didn't even actually have to make that character funny. It was just, it's like, okay, this is the person we're going to laugh at.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, I don't know if you've ever spent any time watching 1970s TV recently, or kind of old stuff. I literally have to hide behind my hands. I mean, it is so terrifyingly
cringy,
sexist, racist, pronatalist, anti-gay, homophobe. It's just everything. It's like, oh my goodness.
Quite the cocktail.
So we see that social change is possible. It's happened in my lifetime. And I think that, considering women without children are, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of the population, and those who identify as LGBTQ are 10% of the population.
Oh, at least it must be more than that.
We are such a massive number.
Yeah.
And shaming us into silence is not going to work any longer. We're done. We're coming out.
Well, also, it's just such a rapidly growing number, isn't it, all the time? Like, we know that figure's doubled in the last generation, like in the last 10 years or so, especially for women.
And it's
Yeah.
going to go up for the millennials. I mean, some data that recently came out in America that you may have seen quite a few sort of analysts looking at shows that the number of women who are childless at age 30 is double what it was, a generation ago.
Yeah.
Now it's gone up from sort of 28 to somewhere around 50. Now that is a very, very clear indicator of how it's changing again. Because yes, some of those young women will have children in their 30s and their early 40s, but so many of them are remaining childless later.
Yeah.
Some, many by choice, but also many because of
just different circumstances.
And they can't get started in life. They, many more of that generation are living at home because of economic reasons, because of internships and student debt and housing problems. So it's very hard to then form that adult partnership and move away to create the nuclear family, which is what we consider to be the way to create a family.
I saw some predictions for in Australia that by 2030 there will be more non-traditional family units, without children, than with.
Yes.
So I thought, well, there you go again. But to me, this really brings into question also what your definition of family looks like.
Yeah.
Because it may not look like, a heterosexual couple with 2.4 kids and a dog. So I think we're moving increasingly away from that stereotype. I mean, it's not the 1950s, is it anymore?
It's very, very deeply encoded.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot of time for that to shift.
Yeah.
But it is shifting. Our politics is based, and our taxation system and our social policy planning is based on thinking of families like that.
Yes.
I mean, it's extraordinary. In my work with AWOC, which is AWOC, the Aging Without Children group, I mean, I was one of the founding members, and until recently I was a board member with them too. And it is extraordinary that in the 4 years that we've been, campaigning, writing and talking about this issue, there's still hardly any recognition in public policy planning that 25% of the adult population, men and women, are going to be aging without children. And that, all it's like families must do more. And it's like, well, actually, you might not have a family. And, we need to think more like the Asians and take care of our elders and things like that.
But we're much more global these days. So it's like even if you've got a great relationship with your parents, you may not live anywhere near them. You may not be able to take care of them. You may not have the resources.
Well, that's why AWOC actually includes all reasons for aging without children, including the fact that your children may have predeceased you.
Yeah.
Your children may have adult care needs of their own. Your children may be in prison. They may live on the other side of the world. They may be, for example, let's say if your daughter lives a long way away and she too is caring for a disabled or vulnerable child or family member. It's like the care, when people talk about families taking care, what they're actually talking about is women taking care. And they're talking, and it's women who didn't used to also have to be 50% of the household income.
Yeah.
Those women, that care is now in the workplace. It's not like, having a job is not a kind of an optional anymore for women or for families. It's like, the income that a woman brings in to her families is often crucial.
Yes.
So she doesn't have that time to drive to the other side of the country or even the other end, an hour's drive away to take care of aging parents. So there's, we have a fundamental shift in how our society operates. But like I said, social policy doesn't want to look at that. And one of the reasons is because if they really looked at it, in a way, the solutions are so massive and so countercultural that no one really wants to go there. And politics tends to have a short lifespan. Yeah. I mean, we need to completely reorganize our society, our taxation system, our social care system, the way we think and talk about it. It's just so huge.
Yeah.
That it's much easier to say, well, families have to do more.
Yeah, it really does need an overhaul, doesn't it? It's like that thing of even if you're in a long-term relationship, but you're not legally married and somebody passes away, you wouldn't necessarily inherit unless they've, left very specific guidelines if you're not legally their husband or wife.
Yes, absolutely. There would be huge taxation implications,
Yeah.
even if they did leave it to you in their will, if you weren't married legally.
Yeah, so there's so many of these things that are so antiquated
Mm-hmm.
that need to be completely overhauled, like you say.
And that's why I look to the millennial generation, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to have any of it.
Yeah.
So and one of the things I really want to do with Gateway Women is to be there for the next generation, to be the big sisters to those who find themselves involuntarily childless. I mean, I do know a few young women, in their 30s already who are childless due to, absolutely irreversible fertility conditions. But as you and I know, a lot of women won't really kind of fully inhabit that they are childless until much later.
Yeah. So,
until their late 30s and early 40s and mid 40s. Yeah.
and so what do you see as the future of Gateway Women sort of moving forward after everything that you've learned and all the coaching and the workshops and the
Yeah.
writing and the speaking and everything that you're doing? I'm sure that you've noticed some huge areas where you will either, you're really drawn to focus on, or you feel that, oh, actually, that's not necessarily part of the future for me, or, are there any
Yeah.
other specific directions that you're feeling very drawn to go in with that?
Yeah. Kind of, there's two come to mind. I mean, the workshops and the communities and those things, those form the absolute core of Gateway Women, and those will continue. And as you know, I've been training other women around the world to lead those workshops.
Yeah.
So we now have women in Holland and Belgium, in the UK, and in America and Canada who are trained to lead them. And so gradually over the next few years, the Reignite Weekend, which is the name of the workshop that I created, those will be popping up around the world. And I feel drawn to sort of two areas, which is really looking at pro-natalism in the workplace.
Yes.
Because I think that, as I said in my TED talk, I believe that women without children, and when I say that deliberately because I mean childless and child-free, women without children in the workplace is the biggest diversity issue HR hasn't heard of.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I'm doing a piece of work with a global organization at the moment. I can't say who, which is really looking at this and the systemic pronatalism and the aggression that is coming back at raising this topic is very, very interesting.
There's that huge assumption,
change.
Isn't there, that, if you've not got children, then you just don't really have any responsibilities. So, of course, you can pick up the slack. You can do all the, late nights. You can do all these things when it's the school holidays.
No recognition.
Yeah.
No reciprocity. No compensation.
Yeah, your time is not as important. That's why. That's the implication.
Yeah, because you are of less value as a human being because you are not a parent. So there you have the pronatalism thing coming through really hard and strong. This is affecting men in the workplace too.
Yeah.
It's not just a female problem, but it's like I feel a little bit so much. My favorite fairy story when I was a little girl was The Emperor's New Clothes. And it's so interesting reflecting back on that now, because that is what I do, which is that, in that fairy tale, the emperor has this set of clothes, which actually he's naked, but everyone has to pretend that he's wearing clothes. And then because the idea is that only people who are stupid can't see them. So nobody wants to actually say that they can't see them. And then a child points out, but he's naked.
Yeah.
And, this feels like one of my roles is actually to kind of be the one pointing the finger at things that other people are committed to not seeing, that they're invested in not seeing it.
Yeah.
And that feels like that's my thing. So, possibly had I become a mother, maybe that part of me would have ended up doing something else with that energy, but it's still very, very core to who I am. And then the other area that I'm interested in is getting the stories of childlessness into the mainstream through humor.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is a comic novel about childlessness.
Brilliant.
And I've showed it to an agent in London, and obviously there's loads more work to do on it. But I was very encouraged when they said, and they read an awful lot of manuscripts, that it was laugh out loud funny. So I thought,
Right.
okay, that's fine. I can work on all of the other stuff that needs work. That's fine. But if it wasn't funny at this point, I think I would just give up.
Yeah. Well, look, it's important, isn't it, to bring humour to sometimes what can be an extremely heavy topic.
If you offer someone a little bit of entertainment and a laugh, then it's actually a great vehicle for introducing them to as you say, a heavy topic.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is I want to take all of that laughter that comes at us, and I want people to laugh with us.
Yes.
I want to really bring, and also I want our stories as women without children to become part of the mainstream narrative of what it means to be a 21st century woman. I don't want us to be left out anymore.
No, to be sidelined.
Yeah.
Well, I feel it's going to happen. And, I was just thinking, actually, when you were saying that, I thought, wouldn't that make a great play?
Yeah. Well, my dream is that I finish the novel and then that the novel gets turned into a film. That's my fantasy dream, that it gets turned into a sort of Bridget Jones type Hollywood rom-com,
well, it's definitely a market.
Comedy thing. And then it goes into the main, and then, our experience, many shades of our experience go into the mainstream.
So who would play the main character?
Let's
make this happen.
That's the fun bit. I really would love to be thinking about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So get it on that vision board. I feel this can happen. Absolutely. Let's completely affirm that. And maybe in 7 years' time, we can do another recording and you can be talking about the release dates.
Yeah. Well, there's still opportunities to be in the novel. So, it's like, I would say, I want to be in it. So, maybe I can have my main character come down to Cornwall for some amazing healing.
Absolutely, and stay with us at Rosemere.
There's a big Celtic bit in the book.
Brilliant.
So I have to say, writing fiction, apart from that, I just don't have enough time at the moment, which is actually driving me a bit potty, not having time to sort of devote to these new things, because you'll understand, Gateway Women and, what you do, we've created something that is so important to so many people, but it's also like a bit of a monster.
Yes, yeah. So it takes on a life of its own, really.
It's a dragon I have to ride, and finding time to write is quite hard. Yeah.
No, it's exciting time. So I feel that there are a lot of changes taking place, and so many women are creating projects and doing something. I don't know I'm sure you've seen the work of Denise Felkin, a photographer.
Oh, absolutely.
I went and met her in December last year in Brighton, and I took part in her project.
Yay!
And it was a really interesting experience, very liberating actually, and of course extremely discreet. It's called Mum's Not the Word, the project. So it's a good kind of play on that. But as she was talking, she said, look, I'll eventually turn this into a book, probably in a few years. I'll see, because of course it's a passion project and something that I'm, doing myself and funding myself. And I just had a feeling, I thought, this is really of its time. And I just felt that this will be happening a lot quicker than you realise. And of course, she's been offered a publishing contract and it is happening. And now she's having to, really speed up the process because she's got a publishing deal. So that's happening. So I feel that all these kind of different things that are happening with women contributing in their own ways to this topic, it's a really interesting time. I feel collectively there is this shift that is occurring, and I feel it's a real kind of watch this space in terms of the next 6 or 7 years, in terms of what will be happening, what will be discussed, and then what will seem normal. We will look back at like 15 years' time and think, well, wasn't that ridiculous?
Yeah.
Won't we?
Yeah,
I really believe that.
I really look forward to that. It's lovely to kind of fast forward in my mind like that. Yeah, because one of the things I find frustrating is that when I take part in documentaries and things like that, is that quite often when the final piece comes out, the Gateway Women bit's been cut because childlessness it's not the miracle baby ending.
Yes,
and childlessness is like the bad fairy at the christening. Child free, different, like a bit groovy, choosing not to be a mum. But childless and it not being fixable by fertility, sort of permanently childlessness is still completely invisible on the screen. Not there at all.
I don't know if you've seen, there's a free film on YouTube which is called A Womb with a View, that was created by Jennifer Miller, a lady that's based in California. I spoke to her last week. She had a hysterectomy. She had wanted to have children, so that was a big thing for her. But because of a lot of endometriosis and a lot of physical pain that she was in, she ended up having a hysterectomy. And she really wanted to change the dialogue around childlessness. So she interviewed all these women and created this film. So many different reasons. Childlessness, so much sadness, but again, so much judgment. And she really wanted to highlight that. And this film was shown at various film festivals.
Oh, I can't wait to check that out.
It's only about an hour. You know, some of it's extremely moving, very interesting, just a very vast range of women that she spoke to. But she said the thing that really got her was, even at some of these viewings at these festivals, she said still the incredible amount of judgment that people would come up to her after they'd watched that. And it was like they still didn't get the point that she was trying to make, or some of the things that women were saying, whereby, you know, there were all sorts of different reasons why they hadn't been able to have children, or they'd chosen not to because of some really difficult circumstances. It was so much thought went into it. They were really taking responsibility. It was extremely selfless in a lot of those situations, but there was still the judgment. And she just thought, wow, you know, this is such a difficult topic, in that some people are just not open to see.
Well, this is the power. This is the power of pro-natalism. This is the power of conditioning. This is the power of ideology. It, you know, it requires to change the way we view that. Requires to change a belief system which has been embedded since early childhood and reflected and reinforced in every institution and every contact we've had in our life. It will, you know, it's going, you either, I think it takes a very special person who's prepared to have their entire worldview challenged. And it's not that it's not possible, but it's rare, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of documentaries like that, and a lot of conversations like you and I are having, and a lot of conversations like, you know, with my TED talk, I called it The Lost Tribe of Childless Women. In brackets, the most terrifying thing I've ever done, close brackets. And, you know, I wrote it and I presented it as a talk for people who aren't childless.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, this is us.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I know that if I talk to a room full of you know, of childless women or women who are trying to conceive or stuff like that, they're going to get it.
Yeah.
But the challenge is, how do we get the rest of the world to understand us and to open their minds and their hearts to our experience? You know, this is the experience, you know, that of pushing back against racism, of pushing back against homophobia. This is not a unique experience. It's about, how do we help people to shift their thinking
and become more tolerant to other people's experiences?
I think the key is difference. It's like how, and I think this is going to be absolutely crucial if human civilization is going to survive. How do we become more tolerant of difference, whatever difference is?
Yeah. And seeing what is actually the same within those differences. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody wants to feel that they belong. And so really looking at the common threads within those differences. Yeah.
It's you know, our you know, Michelle, yours and my work is you know, a tiny fraction of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But it is the work of our time, and it is, you know, it is the work, I think, perhaps, you know, of reclaiming the feminine, you know, of reclaiming community, of empathy, of difference.
Yeah, very important work, and just such interesting times. I mean, I know we could go on about this all day, really, because it's just such a rich topic with so many layers to it. So, well, thank you so much, Jody. That is fantastic. And I can't wait for you to finish your novel and read that. And we'll do a whole episode just about that. So, no, that'll be brilliant. So to come and see the play.
I'll put the the alchemical returning to Cornwall.
Yeah.
I think I shall definitely get a role in there for her. So
absolutely. Gosh, definitely. Brilliant. No, that would be amazing. So, well, thank you, Jody. And so
thank
for
you.
those who are listening to you for the first time, would you like to share your URL details where they can find out everything about your book and all your workshops and your writing?
Oh, goodness, yes, all of it. It's all on the Gateway Women website. So that's gateway-women.com. But if you miss the hyphen, don't worry. Gatewaywomen.com will get to me as well. And I'm at Gateway Women on Instagram, at Gateway Women on Twitter, and all over the place, really. And my book is Living the Life Unexpected, 12 Weeks to Your Plan B for a Meaningful and Fulfilling Future Without Children. That's available online and in bookshops, and it's published by Bluebird Pan Macmillan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.